I'm Bill Latka. I'm a producer, director, climate activist. I helped found the Oil and Water Don't Mix campaign, and I've been working on that for 10 years. We had a great week this week, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But I just want to welcome you all to our little webinar with Peter Sinclair to talk about Michigan's climate moment. There's a lot going on, and we're going to get to it very shortly. But before we do, I'd like to introduce David Petrov and Ann. Oh, sorry, I'm getting blocked here. Ann Rogers and David Petrov, and they're just going to say a few words before we get started. Take it away, Ann.
Am I unmuted yet?
You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, thanks to both of you for working on this at the last minute. We felt it important enough to bring people up to date on what's going on. And it's wonderful that Peter and Bill were so great about getting together and featuring this. I also wanted to tell you that NAMIAC is having their Environmentalists of the Year on April 19th. And you can go online on our website, www.namiac.org, to find out the details. And we encourage you to come and hear David Millarch talk about the importance of trees in our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ann. And now let's take it away, Peter.
There we go.
Okay, I am going to share my screen. There we go. All right. First of all, thank you all for coming. Let me introduce to you my new blog domain. It is think.blog, THINC, which stands for This Is Not Cool, which used to be the name of my video series for Yale Climate Connections, which ended about a year ago. And so finally, I started being able to use that name for my blog, which I wanted to do all along. So many of you know that I've been involved in all things climate communication for quite some time. And with this group, I think, and I probably don't have to do too much introductory stuff. I'd like to just kind of get into it. Here is a graph from the University of Maine. They have a site called Climate Reanalyzer, which is full of data. And don't get freaked out, I will explain. This graph is from today. It is sea surface temperatures globally. If you, let me see. That's interesting. My clicker's not working. Here it is. Okay. So down at the bottom, January, February, March, April, May, June. So that this sort of looks like a calendar. So each of those lines is like the course of a whole year. And every line represents an individual year. Over here on the left, this is temperature in centigrade. And so that shows that there's sort of a regular cycle of temperatures during the year. What you see here is kind of that dotted line in the center there is sort of like a mean or average of the years between 1982 and 2011. And the gold here is sea surface temperatures in 2023. So this was, these graphs have been ricocheting around social media over the last year. And one of my friends, Zeke Housefather, very, very accomplished and highly respected global temperature expert, pronounced this graph gobsmackingly bananas back in, I think, October, and went viral with that. That has continued. This is 2024 so far. And so the gobsmacking continues. We kind of expected, since this was an El Nino year, that we would get warm temperatures, it's been warmer than what we really expected. And there's actually a little bit of a debate broken out in the scientific community. The real debate in the scientific community is not about whether global warming is happening or whether we're causing it. It's sort of trying to figure out the fine points as we go forward in terms of what is it we're seeing, and is our modeling accurate, and if it's not, and why. Gavin Schmidt, who is director of the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York, wrote this piece in Nature this week saying climate models can't explain the huge heat anomaly that we have seen. He asked if we could be in uncharted territory. Sudden heat spike greatly exceeds predictions made by statistical climate models that rely on past observations. And he acknowledges that a lot of this is El Nino, but if this does not stabilize by August, as we expect the El Nino to kind of fade by then, based on previous events, then the world would be in uncharted territory. Now, Gavin's obviously a pretty highly respected guy. Equally well-respected Professor Michael Mann posted, I think, just about the same day, with a little bit of pushback on some of the more, I don't know, alarmed takes on global temperature. And he posted this graph. And this is a graph of going back to 1970. These are the blue, or whatever it is, purple there is climate model sort of ranges, like an upper range, lower range of what climate models have shown. The black line is sort of the mean of those models. The red is what we have actually observed. And so what you can see is there's the most, we now have the 2023 numbers, so there they are, and you see that big spike there. But what you also see is it's kind of within the range of climate models. It doesn't really bust out of the upper expected range of climate models. So in that sense, Dr. Mann says we shouldn't be surprised. Because if we look back at El Nino years of the past, we see similar kind of spikes, and some of them have been quite dramatic. Where the planet is warmer now, and so we're seeing things that we haven't quite seen before. But a spike with El Nino is something that is expected, and so I'm kind of leaning with Dr. Mann on this one. But clearly, I think where Gavin Schmidt and Mann and I would all agree is that with the temperature rise we are seeing, the extreme nature of some of the extreme events that we're seeing has been underestimated. And so things like last year's extreme air pollution from Canadian fires. This was something that was a shock to an awful lot of people and made a lot of people in Michigan maybe reevaluate their idea that somehow we were insulated from the dire effects of climate change. This is a picture from the webcam at the base of the Mackinac Bridge, by the way. And that's not fog, that is smoke, right there at the doorstep of God's country. So not something that Michiganders are used to seeing. So no climate havens has kind of been my my theme over the last year. Just as a reminder, here's what the cumulative daily carbon emissions look like from Canadian forest fires over the last few decades, last 20 years. And here is 2023. You can kind of see Bill, I've got a big black line on the top of my screen that says this meeting is being recorded. Is that something you can get rid of?
You should be able to. You should be
Okay,
able to exit out.
I got it. I got it. Okay. All right. So yeah, there's the wildlife or the wildfire emissions from 2023, and you can see that what an outlier that year was. And what we already know as of February, that in Alberta, the fire season was declared an early start, 10 days earlier than normal, because so many fires were held over as so-called zombie fires smoldering in the permafrost through the winter, that they had, which is a normal thing that always happens, except this year they had 10 times as many of those zombie fires restart in the spring than they normally do. And they started earlier because it was a relatively dry, relatively warm winter. And nobody is yet able to say for sure whether we'll have a fire season like we had last summer, because that did sort of rely on certain weather patterns that may or may not repeat. But what we can say is that a fire season like last summer is probably made a lot more likely going forward than it would have been in the past. Natural disasters are increasing in frequency across the US. That orange line is sort of an average there. And extreme storms, severe storms seem to be one of the big drivers of that. And we've certainly seen those here in Michigan, places, well, really all around the state, experiencing extreme rains, extreme precipitation, and the occasional tornado in places where we don't expect a tornado happening. So revisiting this idea that Michigan might be some kind of climate haven, a lot of people have talked about an expectation that people are going to start to move to Michigan to somehow escape the worst effects of climate change. That really hasn't started happening yet. I mean, it anecdotally, there are people here and there who tell us that they've come from California or Texas or Arizona or Florida to Michigan to escape climate change. But statistically, overall, the states in dark red here are the places where vast numbers of Americans still continuing to move to, right into the path of the worst effects of climate change. So Nevada, Arizona, and Florida, you can see the respective gains in population that they've had. Well, this is since 1950, but those gains continue. And I think Arizona, I think Phoenix is the #1 area that people are moving to from all over the country. So picture that. I have a hard time wrapping my mind around it, but also Florida. People continue to move to Florida in the expectation that things are going to be great down there. And we keep getting more and more concerning news items from Florida. For instance, insurance companies are pulling out of Florida because of the continued extreme impact from storms that are basically making it impossible for insurance to charge enough to cover the risk that they're bearing down there. And recently, Governor Ron DeSantis spoke about the so-called citizens insurance, which is a tax-funded, Florida state taxpayer-funded insurance group, the insurer of last resort in Florida. And it was meant to be just that, last resort. But what's happened is so many people are being priced out of regular insurance or having their regular insurance canceled that they're going to the Citizens, and Citizens is overburdened. And according to the governor, he says it is not solvent, and we can't have millions of people on it because if a storm hits, it's going to cause problems. now this brings us back to sea surface temperatures. Here's sea surface temperatures from February, as reported by WFLA in Tampa. And what you see there is the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, which is an area that is known as the main development region. This is where hurricanes are born. And as of February, this graph is from February, already in this area, the sea surface temperatures were warm enough to be normal for July. And there's been a big flurry and a continuing flurry from meteorologists very concerned about what this year's hurricane season is going to look like if temperatures continue to be that warm. And the statistical chance, according to Jeff Berardelli at WFLA, statistical chance that any particular February day would be that warm is 1 in 280,000. So way, way, way beyond the realm of chance. This is what human-caused climate change does, and that's what it looks like. And because of this threat to literally billions and billions of dollars of exposure in Florida, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse on the Budget Committee has been looking into this whole question of Florida's citizens' insurance and the exposure, because if they get a really bad storm there, it's going to cause citizens to perhaps collapse, and then they would possibly be asking for the rest of us federal taxpayers to bail them out. Now, citizens, for their part, and some of the experts in Florida say, no, that's not true, because if we get a huge storm and we run out of money, we'll just levy a charge on all of the people in Florida of many, many thousands of dollars to make up the difference, which you can imagine how well that's going over in Florida. Senator Whitehouse points out this is not just a Florida problem, and these numbers can get obviously very, very big. And he worries that this could possibly be sort of the beginning of a very, very large fiscal shortfall that could extend not just to Florida, but all the way up and down the coast. I recently talked to Glenn Schwartz, aka Hurricane Schwartz, a long-time TV meteorologist in the Philadelphia area, about the increasing number of extremes, rain events and storms happening in the Northeast. If you were watching TV last summer, you saw massive, massive flooding in northern Vermont, Burlington, and I keep forgetting the name of the capital up there, but way up in northern Vermont, another place that was supposed to be a climate refuge that is turning out to be actually extremely vulnerable to some of these extreme events. And this is driving up insurance rates for all of us. In fact, just last week, the chairman of the Federal Reserve singled out extreme weather events and their impact on insurance as one of the key drivers still of inflation. So that is something that should be concerning to all of us. All right, so we could go on and on and on about the scale of the problem, and many of you probably know all too well how serious that is. But right now, we in Michigan are kind of in the global crosshairs as being one of the key places where solutions will either be implemented or be severely hampered and delayed. Just to kind of set the stage for where we are. This is global CO2 emissions since 1900. You can see that where we are up in 2023. If we had decided, say, in 2019 to bring those emissions down to where they need to be, 0 by 2050, this is the kind of slope that we would be looking at. So for skiers out there, that looks like sort of a triple black diamond experts only slope, but we're all going to have to somehow head down that slope without a whole lot of more experience than just having been on the bunny hill. And that's the situation that we are in right now. And it's only getting more daunting as we go forward. We have an advantage in that the clean energy that we want to go to, solar and wind, is the cheapest energy that exists out there. And some people will argue for nuclear, and you know, I'm certainly willing to entertain anybody's arguments. But as of right now, nuclear is pretty expensive, and it takes a long time to build. It's very challenging, and so my strategic response to that is to say there is no future scenario of decarbonization that does not include massive build out of solar and wind. Whether or not nuclear ever is made to work, or whether we, as I suspect, I am optimistic, things like some of the deep rock geothermal technologies will pan out in the coming decade. But for right now, what we have is solar and wind. And we need to be building it out as rapidly as possible. And for a number of reasons, we have been failing. A lot of the talking points that you hear from the fossil fuel industry about renewable energy, solar and wind, is that they're not reliable. U.S. News and World Report recently did a ranking of all 50 states by grid reliability. How many blackouts do they have? How many minutes of no power do they have? And among the top 10 states, you have 4, if we're just talking about renewables, that have quite large penetrations. Nebraska, 37%, South Dakota, 84%, Nevada, 37%, Iowa, according to, actually it says 66% here. It's actually probably more like 70+% at this point. Most of that is wind, but rapidly expanding solar. So in the top 10 states, you have a whole lot of evidence that clean energy makes grids more reliable, not less. And if we go overseas to places like Germany and Denmark and Scotland, which have very high penetration of renewable energy, we find grids that are, in the case of Germany, 5 times more reliable than the United States grid. We're told by conservatives or by clean energy opponents that we can only rely on things like coal and gas and nuclear. Well, Michigan's grid is 85+% coal, gas, and nuclear. So by that logic, we would think that Michigan would have one of the most reliable grids of the 50 states. But in fact, Michigan ranks 43rd, a sad 43rd, I might say. So there's not a relationship in the numbers between grid reliability and how much renewables you have on the grid. Having a reliable grid comes from, first of all, deciding that you want a reliable grid, and then planning for it, getting the engineering talent on board, and making sure the funding is there to execute it. That's what makes a reliable grid. And when we decide to do that here in Michigan, that's when we're going to get there. As far as the price, we take a look at Iowa, and this is just from a few months ago from the U.S. Energy Information Agency. They were paying 12.8 cents a kilowatt hour for residential electricity. South Dakota, about the same. Michigan, 18.2 cents. So they're about 25% cheaper with 2/3 or more renewable energy in Iowa than what we have in Michigan with 85% coal gas nuclear. So again, the idea that renewable energy necessarily makes a grid less reliable or more expensive is just not borne out in the numbers. So don't let anybody fool you on that one. And I want to, there's other things I want to talk about, but I can't move on without addressing this really fantastic study that we have just in the last few weeks from Argonne National Laboratory. This relates to solar. And we have heard, and a lot of people on the progressive end of the spectrum are particularly vulnerable and are actually being targeted with the idea that putting solar on farmland, for instance, is somehow damaging to the farmland or somehow a negative, something that should be avoided. But in fact, this is a study, collaborative between Argonne National Lab and the National Renewable Energy Lab, where they looked at 2 solar facilities in southern Minnesota on farmland, and typical of all of the projects that we see, they were in between the solar panels planted with native plants and pollinators. This is pretty much standard procedure anymore. And they followed these, the performance of these facilities for 5 years. So what they saw over that time is an increase in native plant species diversity and flower abundance, increases in the abundance and diversity of native insect pollinators and agriculturally beneficial insects. Total insect abundance tripled, while native bees showed a 20-fold increase in numbers. And pollinators from the solar sites visited soybean flowers in adjacent fields, providing additional pollinator services. We also have a study from Yale and another study from the National Renewable Energy Lab showing how the native plants, since they have such deep roots, do a wonderful job of restoring soil, bringing nutrients and carbon down into the soil, locking up carbon, and bringing water down into aquifers, recharging aquifers. In fact, Dr. David Mullah at the University of Minnesota told me that there is an active area of study now looking at the potential benefits of having solar sites over fields where there's been contamination of the water table from fertilizers, particularly things like nitrates, which cause cancer and is one reason why Iowa is the second leading state for cancer in the country, because of terrible pollution from nitrates and from pesticides. So resting this field for 30 years under solar is not something that damages farmland. In fact, it is something that preserves the farmland. And as I'll be talking about here, I have been collecting interviews with farmers from across the state who understand that having some additional income from wind or solar that is drought-proof, recession-proof, flood-proof, guaranteed over 20 and 30 years into the future, means that they can stay on, or their heirs, their family can stay on as stewards of the land, and thereby shield that land against really the greatest threat that we face here in Michigan, which is urban sprawl. And that's why among the anti-clean energy groups that I deal with around the state, you never have to look very far to find someone in the real estate development business, because this is where real estate developers are looking for, they don't like to see clean energy come in because they know if it does, those farmers are going to be economically stable. They will not have to sell their land. They will not have to go out of business. And that land will not become available for developers to turn into strip malls, subdivisions, concrete, burger joints, and sprawl. So this is another big reason why clean energy is so important. But we have been seeing again and again over the last decade that solar and wind projects are being stopped by this sort of MAGA style paranoia, conspiracist, and disinformation movement that really started down in Lenawee County back in the 2010s. And I'm currently just finishing up a video project on this, but when a major wind project was canceled down in Lenawee, that project moved up to Gratiot, which is not far away from me. And Gratiot County has since seen a whole lot of wind development because they were so happy with those first couple of wind farms. And they worked out so well that they have, I think at this point, 5 or 6 wind farms. And immediately adjacent in Isabella County, there are now 2 wind farms, one of them very large. So I have been talking to a lot of farmers around the state. This is John Tuckerman, who at that time, back in 2010, 11, 12, was the county chairman of Lenawee County. And he was very familiar with the fight that went on. And he is himself a centennial farmer and understands what the benefits would be to himself and other folks, other farmers in the community. And so this is just a little piece of what he told me that's going to kind of be a springboard for our conversation here.
But as far as the wind energy, we've kind of seen what's happened to that for our area. When all the townships made exclusive zoning to, I might add, a state accepted land use, which was illegal. The wind people moved up to Gratiot County and were welcomed with open arms.
So you notice that he said the exclusive zoning, he called it. That means zoning that excludes a particular land use. And if you talk to knowledgeable officials like Mr. Tuckerman, they understand that the controlling legislation here is the Michigan Zoning and Enabling Act. And I've been speaking to some experts about this, notably Matthew Eisenson, who is at Columbia University Law School and in a special climate unit that they have there. And he has been working with farmers in Michigan for several years now, so has had a chance to look at the controlling laws and also the precedents in case law around this particular concept. And he pointed me to the, oops, that's weird. Let's see. He pointed me to the, okay, it's gonna go away. Hang on, I can fix this. I can fix this. I'm just going to leave this on the screen. He pointed me to this, the controlling piece of the Zoning and Enabling Act, which is here, and it says a zoning ordinance or zoning decision shall not have the effect of totally prohibiting the establishment of a land use within a local government in the presence of a demonstrated need for that land use within either that local unit of government or the surrounding area within the state. A zoning decision shall not have the effect of totally prohibiting the establishment of a land use within a local unit of government. So this is meant to protect farmers and their property rights who wish to take advantage of a legal use of land. And solar and wind are legal uses of land. So noting this problem, Michigan, under the leadership of Governor Whitmer and with the courageous cooperation of members of the legislature, passed some of the country's most ambitious clean energy bills in November. And part of that suite of bills was a siting reform for clean energy that said that if a local zoning board passed what Mr. Tuckerman called an illegal exclusionary zoning ordinance, that a farmer or a developer could bring that project to the Michigan Public Service Commission in Lansing, have it reviewed there, and a ruling or decision could be made at that level with a great deal of experience and expertise that they have on the staff there. But you're not going to be able to just block out solar and wind projects anymore. And I should say, you might ask the question, well, wait a minute, if they're doing something that's illegal, how is that possible that they can get away from it or get away with it? The answer is that the Zoning and Enabling Act does not have any real enforcement mechanism unless a developer or a farmer is willing to file suit against the township or the county. And typically, developers don't want to get into a very expensive and maybe 5, 6, 7 year legal process. So they would rather just move on. And farmers kind of feel the same way. They don't want to get involved, although that is starting to change. So it really needed a higher authority to step in. And I would compare the comparison that I would make is to, if you think about segregation of South in the 1950s, where the people's voting rights were being violated in the same way that farmers' property rights are being violated today. When people's voting rights were being violated, a time came when the federal government said, no, you can't do that anymore. There is a higher authority here. We're passing the Voting Rights Act. We're bringing the authority of the federal government to restore people's and protect people's voting rights. Just the same way here, the state has stepped in and say, no, we're going to protect farmers' property rights for a legal use of land, and we're not going to allow these MAGA-fueled conspiracist mobs to push boards into passing these restricted bills. So the governor's legislation has sort of kicked over a hornet's nest, and there is now a ballot initiative you may have heard of. People are gathering signatures to put a measure on the ballot to kill this part of the legislation, which is the siting reform. And it so happens that I know the players who are behind this ballot initiative. The primary one is this gentleman, Kevin Marlis, who I have butted heads with numerous times over the last 7 or 8 years. And he is a self-described senior fellow for the fossil fuel funded Washington, D.C. think tank, E&E Legal. If you go to their website, you'll see his picture. And that is a group that I know very, very well from 12 and 15 years ago when I was interviewing climate scientists who were specifically under legal threat and attack and harassment by this group as well as others. E&E Legal and its predecessor group were filing all kinds of lawsuits and onerous FOIA requests and legal threats of various kinds against some of our most prominent climate scientists, including Michael Mann, who I mentioned before, including the current dean of the University of Michigan School of Environment, Jonathan Overpeck. And so what's been interesting is that Mr. Martis was brought in and specifically trained to be an anti-clean energy activist back in 2012. And what they did was equip them with all of the tools that they had been using against scientists, and now they are deploying those tools against farmers and local officials across the Midwest. But to give you an even clearer idea of who Mr. Martis is and what kind of circles he hangs out in, I'm going to let you listen to an introduction or a little talk about him by a guy named Sam Randazzo. And then you'll watch in this video and find out a little bit more about Sam Randazzo. Sam Randazzo is a longtime associate and good friend of Mr. Martis, as you will see.
Yeah, thanks. Hello, my name is Sam Randazzo, and I'm from Ohio, where we're still celebrating the victory last November. But there is a hero among you. And Kevin Martis is that gentleman. He has done more to educate legislators, average citizens, local officials about the experiences of people that have lived near wind farms than any other single human I'm aware of. And he does it because of his passion. So you're very lucky to have him here this evening. And he inspires me quite often. I represent the Greenwich Neighbors United group that has been toiling in the trenches for almost 5 years now as a result of a project that is proposed very near the town of Greenwich. And I'll talk a little bit more about the experience from that case. I am not paid by the Koch brothers. In fact, I'm lucky to get anything in the way of payment.
New developments today in the ongoing federal bribery investigation involving Ohio's billion-dollar bailout of First Energy's nuclear power plants in 2019. Today, the former head of the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio surrendered in federal court. Sam Randazzo pleaded not guilty today to bribery and fraud charges in connection with a $60 million bribery scheme that also sent Ohio's former House Speaker to prison for 20 years. The FBI says Randazzo accepted more than $4 million in bribes from First Energy for his future help at the Utilities Commission. Governor Mike DeWine personally picked Randazzo as the state's top utility regulator 1 month later. Former Speaker Larry Householder was sentenced to 20 years in June for his role in the scheme, and the former chair of the Ohio Republican Party, Matt Borges, was also sentenced to 5 years in prison. If convicted, Randazzo faces up to 20 years in prison.
So Mr. Martis has a number of fascinating connections in the fossil fuel industry, above and beyond E&E Legal, of course. But Mr. Randazzo is certainly a prize, and we will affirm that no one is guilty until proven so in a court of law. And Mr. Randazzo's trial is ongoing. However, the fact that there have already been several convictions in the same case leads one to believe that perhaps there is not just a lot of smoke there, perhaps some fire as well. So Mr. Martis created he created a petition drive to put on the ballot something that would repeal part of Governor Whitmer's laws, and he started a online page called Our Home, Our Voice. And some independent journalists at Energy and Policy Institute started looking into this. Dave Anderson, who I've spoken to about this in depth, did some investigation. And what they found was that when they x-rayed the Facebook page of the Our Home, Our Voice, they found out that the administrator and the moderator for the Facebook page were in fact employees of a public relation firm. I'm going to go right to it. They were employees of a public relation firm called Marketing Resource Group that has had a long relationship with the Wolverine Pipeline Company in Lansing. And I'm just going to back up a little bit, and I apologize because I was putting this together just minutes before we got started here. Hang on, let's go, here we go. Yeah, and so Mr. Martis told the in testimony before the legislature, said that Our Home and Our Voice is a pure grassroots coalition of local officials and private citizens. And he said that it's entirely funded by rural residents and receives no industry support of any kind. But he failed to mention that the group was being supported by the employees of this marketing resource group with deep relations to the Wolverine Pipeline Company. And the Wolverine Pipeline Company is a subsidiary of, wait for it, ExxonMobil, it turns out. So now maybe the folks that were administrating and moderating the Facebook page were doing that simply on their own time out of just a deep passion for the agenda of the fossil fuel industry. We don't know. But everywhere you look with Mr. Martis, you find these fascinating connections to fossil fuel. It's like you've heard of the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. You don't have to go 6 degrees from Mr. Martis to find connections to the fossil fuel industry. It's more like a degree or a degree and a half. And the real tell in this whole Our Home, Our Voice movement is that they're trying to repeal the siting reform, which is allowing farmers to accept solar and wind on their land. And the way they're doing it is they are trying to create the impression that somehow farmers or communities are being forced to accept these clean energy projects, when in fact, no farmer is ever going to have a wind turbine or solar on his land unless he actively seeks it out and signs an agreement for which he's going to be guaranteed a very, very fair payment for that over a 20, 30-year period. Many people may have heard of something called eminent domain. Eminent domain is something that the government uses to cite things like pipelines, for instance, where in fact the company and the government really do seize people's land. They do take away local choice. If they need to run a pipeline, they're going to run the pipeline, and they'll pay you something for that land, but you don't have a choice as to where it's going to go. So the tell in this whole effort is that the real loss of local control comes when you have things like the fossil fuel industry putting through a pipeline. But Mr. Martis has nothing to say about the loss of local control that comes to communities where pipelines are going through. He's just trying to stop clean energy, which is something that is entirely up to the farmer's choice and the use of his property rights. So I think that's a really telling point to make. Mr. Martis also has some other fascinating relationships. He, in 2022, shared a stage in Trufant, Michigan with Ryan Kelly. Ryan Kelly, you may remember, ran for governor and was shortly after indicted and convicted and served time in prison for his leadership in the J6 riot at the Washington Capitol, which is interesting because about 6 months before the J6 event, Mr. Martis had this Facebook post in which he said, I don't condone this at all, but I have warned state legislators that the true cost of 40, 50, or 60% wind generation in any given state must include the cost of a new Capitol building, because folks won't take it and will resort to extreme actions. So I really like the way this is worded, because it's very much like a sort of a mob-like approach. I don't condone this at all. It would be really too bad if something happened to your capital, but this is what will happen if we build too much clean energy. Just so you know. Also, immediately after the energy reform was passed in early December, late November, one of the primary vectors for and distributors of misinformation about clean energy was Matt Maddock, who is a legislator and married to Michonne Maddock, whose name you might be familiar with because she was one of the indicted so-called fake electors that is currently, I believe that trial is ongoing. But she was part of a nationwide group to overturn the 2020 election with the use of fake electoral documentation. And so she and her husband are deeply involved in misinforming about clean energy, right along with Kevin Martis. So it gets deeper. We recently found that this ballot campaign is being backed by the Michigan Farm Bureau, and a lot of people might say, "Well, the Farm Bureau, that's the farmers, isn't it?" Well, actually, the Farm Bureau is an insurance company that happens to be rural-based, and they do have some farmers as their customers, but I'm told that by and far it is smaller landowners and particularly people that have sort of moved into rural areas as part of a sprawl type development and are often the kind of people that are very much involved in trying to restrict farmers' free use of their land. And what's interesting is that I happen to have a copy of the Farm Bureau's policy book for 2023. And this is what it says on page 122 about private property rights. We believe any action by the government diminishing an owner's right to use their property, and they mention the Endangered Species Act or the Natural Rivers Act, constitutes a taking of that owner's property. So what strikes me here is that they don't like endangered species much. They don't care about natural rivers very much. But in the final analysis, don't really care so much about farmers' property rights either, because if it's a choice between farmers' property rights and the interests of the fossil fuel industry, they're choosing the fossil fuel industry. And I'm composing an email to the director of the Michigan Farm Bureau. I should have sent out today. I'll send it out on Monday. See if he wants to be interviewed and perhaps respond to the divergence between their actions and what their written policy is. I'm going to show you now some more of the interviews that I've done with folks around the state. I want you to meet Deborah Comstock. She grew up on a farm in Lenawee County. She still lives on that land. She has been a journalist. She has been a chair of the Planning Commission in Palmyra Township down there. And she's editor and publisher of a new rural paper in a news desert. She has started a new newspaper in a rural area, which is a brave thing to do. And I spoke to her at length not long ago.
We have a faction of people that are not reasonable, and this is a problem. And the community is going to have to stand up and take a stand on this to say, this is something we want. When are we going to start finding some middle ground that says, this is ideal? It doesn't hurt the soil. It doesn't take away our farmland. We can get used to it just like we got used to wearing seatbelts. And just like we got used to paying car insurance, you can't drive your car unless you have insurance. We railed against it, but now it's the way it is. And it could be this way with solar too, if we were reasonable. I attended the county commission meeting and I got up and I said, look, this has got to stop. It's got to stop. We got to stop this opposition for no reason. And you need to get on board here because your county is starving. Well, here's my take on the argument of the antis against solar and wind. Their premise is that we want to preserve the farmland. Well, we know science and research now from Yale and there's a lot of studies out there about soil preservation and resting soil. They're not opposed to putting houses on farmland, but they are opposed to putting a solar array on farmland that will actually enhance the farmland. So if we put in a residential area on some of these crops, and these farmers don't have a choice. Some of them are selling off their properties. They need the money. You put 5 or 6 homes on there, and that's gone forever. That land will never come back. It can never be farmed. It can never be farmed again.
I'm drawing to a close here, and I just want to leave you with a few anecdotes. This is a place I was at a couple weeks ago, Bushnell Township, and I had been to a couple of Bushnell Township meetings in regard to a proposed solar farm there. Those meetings, the first meetings that I went to were in high school gymnasiums because they had a larger crowd. And in that first one in particular, all of us that showed up in support of the solar project were threatened by essentially a gang of yahoos that were hanging out in the hall and hanging out in the parking lot afterwards under the watchful eye of a sheriff's deputy. The board kept working on an ordinance and a permit for a solar farm kind of quietly and courageously, and gradually kind of outlasted the opposition, and with the great support of the developer, they were able to satisfy all the major concerns of the community. And so I was asked to come down there a couple of weeks ago to attend a meeting where it was hoped that the permit would be granted, and they just asked me to show up in case there was any need to push back against misinformation or something like that. And you can see the building here. I actually drove by this building twice because I thought it was a tool shed. This is their township hall. It's sitting on about an 18 by 20 foot concrete slab. It's just 4 prefab walls and a roof. No running water, no toilet. This is their township hall. This is the kind of poverty that we see and underfunded communities that we see across rural Michigan and across rural America. And on the inside, you basically have a bare room with an odd assortment of card tables. That's what these guys are working with. And if you see the chairs in the foreground, they're like literally 1940s vintage folding chairs. This is their township hall. And there couldn't be a more ordinary group of people that you'd ever imagine. But these folks had been working diligently for 3 years while under massive harassment and threats from conspiracy-driven people in the community. And they finally came together, and on this day, after a very short discussion, they passed unanimously a permit for a new 132 megawatt solar farm. And I was sitting there in the room, and I will say, I was in tears. And I wanted to thank them, but I could barely speak because the courage and the simple courage of these people is something that should give us all a little bit of hope and maybe a little bit of sense that if they can do it, we ought to be able to do it too. It is actually really inspiring. And these are not like left-wing, greeny, climate concerned people. These are just people that want to do the right thing for their community and the right thing in so far as their community's property rights. And I'll leave you with some words I got from Larry Gould, former county commissioner in Lenawee, longtime farmer, someone who told me that in going to meetings 10, 12 years ago about wind farm, he would have to bring his son as a bodyguard because the threats and harassment were so intense back during that time.
I pass on, the wind is still going to blow. We're 30 miles off the Lake of Erie. We're getting winds off Lake Erie. Those wind actions come in at a height that wind turbines can pick up. I may not see it, but I can tell you my grandkids will see those wind turbines. They're going to come.
And that's going to wrap the main part of the program. I want to leave you with some resources that I hope you'll look into. My blog, of course, think.blog. I am still on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. Peter W. Sinclair. I am Peter Sinclair on Facebook as well. And wind101.info. A lot of good resources there that I hope people will share on social media. Same thing with sun101.org. So I hope you will check those out. I'm beating the drums for people to get as involved on social media as the misinformers and disinformers are. That's where we're really falling down, folks. We are not pushing back against the misinformation and disinformation, and we're allowing these folks free reign on social media. And as disagreeable as it is, I've created all these resources so that you can just drop one on your Facebook page and walk away. And don't bother to get in any arguments. Don't bother to get down into the comment threads. Just drop some truth there, walk away, come back a day later, drop some more. And so that's my hope. But anyway, I don't know how much time we've got left, but if people have any questions or any concerns or anything that I didn't explain fully, I'm happy to engage.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was great. So I did put those links, Peter's links, in the chat, and you can go and click on those now and open them up in tabs on your browser, so you can look at those later. That way you don't have to remember. And I also would like to say, please go ahead and drop any, if you have any questions, you could raise your hand, which is, there's a little icon at the bottom called reactions. If you click on that, you'll see a way to raise your hand. And then we'll just kind of go round robin and answer questions. It looks like Philip Reed has a question. Go ahead, Philip, unmute yourself and ask the question.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Peter. I have a question. So my understanding about the siting ordinance is that the MPSC has jurisdiction for projects in excess of 50 megawatts. And I've been told by people that 50 megawatts is at the least about 250 acres. And when you consider, infrastructure, you're probably getting closer to 300 acres, for a 50 megawatt project. So my question is, how many projects are you aware of that are bigger than 50 megawatts that are being contemplated, in counties in Michigan?
Well, first of all, I think it's the law applies to projects that are greater than 100 megawatts if they're solar or wind, but it's 50 megawatts if it's battery storage.
Okay.
So it applies to solar, wind, and battery storage.
But that would even yeah.
I'm sorry?
I'm saying, so that would even double the acreage that's in play by the Michigan Public Service Commission. And I'm just wondering how many projects are out there of that size being contemplated.
Well, I don't know. I don't have a number for you insofar as how many projects may be proposed. But what we do have is kind of an idea of if we do achieve an ambitious build outs of solar and wind, say, the ground that would be required for solar would be on the range of something like 3.5% of Michigan farmland. And we also assume that there will be solar on rooftops, there will be solar on parking lots, there will be solar on community solar in places like Detroit and Flint and Grand Rapids. So we kind of need it all, and so just as a means of comparison, so 3.5% of our farmland, if that were to go to solar, that would be less than half of what we currently have in production for corn ethanol, and corn ethanol is vastly more inefficient way of producing energy. So just as an example, I talked to Paul Mathewson at Clean Wisconsin. He's a PhD that conducted a study comparing the relative efficiency of corn ethanol versus solar on the same plot of land. And he found out, he compared it like apples to apples, like what would it take for to produce an amount of ethanol to power a combustion car versus what would it take to produce an amount of electricity to power an EV. And by that comparison, the efficiency of solar on cropland is a factor of somewhere between 80 and 150 times greater than ethanol. So if we agree, and I believe that we made an agreement 40 or 50 years ago when we started using ethanol, that farmland, use of farmland for fuel production is a reasonable idea, then using that farmland for solar is a far more efficient way of using it, with the added benefit of actually improving that farmland and soil over time, whereas ethanol is an industrial application that continues to just degrade the soil, which is a big problem. Does that answer your question? Cool. Anybody else?
Any more questions? Oh, David, go ahead. Unmute yourself and ask away.
It's not as much a question as another aspect that I only one time briefly heard about the ethanol, because it's not good for most cars, well, particularly small engines and things like that. But it was just, I think 2 years ago, I read a brief that there was a lot of corn being shipped to the United States from Brazil, okay, to make ethanol. And that's, you think in terms of, well, we want to protect the rainforest. Guess what they're doing? They're cutting down rainforests to grow corn to make ethanol in the United States. And it's like, that's kind of like not efficient at all or good for the environment. It's just ridiculous. But anyway,
I would agree.
Yeah.
I see someone else has made a comment saying solar panels on every rooftop can cover tremendous acreage without disrupting farms. I had a conversation with Missy Stoltz. Missy Stoltz is a PhD and runs the Clean Energy Transition Office for the city of Ann Arbor. And so in the course of her work, they did a survey of the entire city of Ann Arbor for every possible space where solar could possibly be implemented. Every rooftop, every parking lot, every playground, every spare bit of land, whatever it might be, they categorized it all. And they added it all up, and they found that it would be something like 400 megawatts capacity of solar. While the current demand that Ann Arbor has on average for electricity is 440 megawatts. And in the future, as we electrify with EVs and things of that nature, they expect that Ann Arbor will eventually draw something like 800 megawatts. So within the boundaries of our cities, and I would compare Ann Arbor, pretty much use that as a proxy for just about any city, we're going to need more than just the solar that we can obtain from our rooftops. There's a lot to be said about the regulatory reform that needs to be done to make rooftop solar more attractive and more profitable for homeowners and business owners. And we can talk about it at length, but basically what is going to continue to drive that is the continuing plunging prices of solar, and in particular prices of batteries continuing to go down, that are going to make it more and more attractive for homeowners and businesses to not necessarily drop off the grid, but start storing their own electricity, storing electricity when it's cheap, and running off their battery at times when it's more expensive, and thereby depriving the utilities of revenue during those most profitable times. And the utilities are slowly figuring this out. And as their thought process, gets a few steps further, they're going to realize that they have to come up with some kind of agreeable regulatory process that they can go along with that will encourage more solar, and that they can begin to view themselves not as the sole generators of electricity, but as administrators or coordinators of a system of electric services. And if they do that, they'll be successful, and they'll probably make more money than ever, and it'll get us a lot further down the road.
Thanks, Peter. And Kathy, I see your hand raised. We'll get to you next. In Traverse City, there's a brand new retirement community that's being built over by the West High School. It's a giant, like several giant buildings, and a lot of them are facing south. Not one solar panel in sight. Brand new construction. It just makes me crazy that we don't have any kind of regulation for new construction to put solar panels on these roofs. I mean, for goodness sake, what are we doing? You know, that would be a perfect opportunity.
I get it, and it's a terrible. It's why we need to push for some kind of regulatory reform that will make that more of a no-brainer for developers. But it is incredible to me that in a progressive city like Ann Arbor that someone can't think 10 years ahead and figure out that for a building of that sort that's going to be around for 50 years or more, that solar is going to be really important.
Yeah, for sure. And go ahead with your question. It's C. Nisbet. What's your first name? Is it Kathy? Oh, it looks like you have to unmute there.
There you go. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm unmuted. Okay. Yeah, actually, I am in Traverse City, well, close to Traverse City, and we have just last year we put our own solar system up. My question, you've answered part of it, Peter, was how can we make it so that the people want to do the solar more? Because a lot of people are going, well, they don't understand that you can put solar up. For us, we did do the battery, and we understand that we're storing it so that we store it so that if we have power outage, we're in a rural area, we've got power. But many of these people that don't do the battery storage or they just hook up to the utility don't understand that if you have a power outage, you don't get power. You're out just like everybody else is out. So that was I'm trying to figure out how we can make that more integrated into the energy systems selling themselves and making people understand this. I know in Florida, they don't. They sell it, but these people don't even know that it's not great. They're not obligated to enlighten these people about that situation, which befuddles me. So that's my first question. And then I have one other one, which is in regards to gas. I lived on the south side of Traverse City, and they're just starting to bring gas lines down to our area. And the reason they're being able to do this is because they've received a grant from the federal government to bring these gas lines down. Is that part of this whole like buying us off?
Okay, first question is about combining solar, rooftop solar with battery storage. And as I mentioned, the price of batteries is following a similar curve to what happened to solar over the last decade. It's just dropping. And I think a lot of people are following that and starting to buy these either freestanding battery units or some of the larger ones, the so-called power walls and things like that. But moreover, people are buying electric vehicles. And despite what you may have read in the media, the sales of electric vehicles rose 50% last year, year over year. And we sold in the United States 1 million electric vehicles for the first time. And the automakers are investing major commitments, billions of dollars to electric vehicle manufacturing. So we're going to have, we've already got hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million EV owners. We're going to have millions and many millions within a relatively short time, 5 years or so. And those people are starting to think about, okay, how can I wire my electric vehicle into my home system? Now, if you've got like one of a Ford Lightning or one of the Cybertrucks or maybe some of the other vehicles, I'm not familiar with all of them, have like an outlet, a plug similar to the plug in your wall, that if you did have a blackout, you could run simple, least sort of most basic approach would be to run an extension cord right from your electric vehicle to power your refrigerator, keep a few lights on, and maybe perhaps run your furnace if you're sophisticated enough to do that, or at least run a space heater during a power outage. As we get further along, we will have easier and easier ways for people to interface directly with the electrical system of their home, and people will be signing up to have their battery in their car interact with the larger grid and both store power at certain times, but also voluntarily, if they choose to, be able to provide power to the grid in times of need and be compensated for that. It's called vehicle to grid. And so after, over the last few years, maybe 5-10 years ago, there was a certain amount of resistance to that from car manufacturers because they worried about stress and strain on the batteries. But now, with the newer batteries coming out that have super long lifetimes and can accept many charges and discharges, it's really much less of an issue. So as that sort of enters people's consciousness, they're going to be thinking more and more about how can I provide for myself during some of these extreme weather events, which are only going to increase. And so I think that's going to be more and more on people's minds. Now, you mentioned the gas line getting some kind of subsidy. I don't know what to say to that. I believe you, but there's a whole lot of, like, one hand not knowing what the other hand's doing so far in energy policy, and it's not really a matter of it's just, first of all, there's a whole lot of contractors out there, home builders and home buyers, who still think that having gas is absolutely essential. And they're being, in many cases, kind of misinformed, disinformed, or at least riled up by right-wing media, insofar as, this idea that government's trying to take away my gas stove or something along those lines. So, I mean, that's something we all need to work on in educating ourselves and educating people we know that, sooner or later we have to start thinking in terms of what it's going to be like in the future, rather than just the way that we've done it for the last 100 years. And that's where I'm just hoping that more and more people become active communicators in these issues. And I hope to, support people as much as I can in that capacity.
Thank you very much, Peter. We really appreciate everybody for coming. We're at time, so we're going to call it quits. I would like to just remind you what Ann said at the beginning. Please look out for an email next week. We are going to be having tickets on sale for the Environmentalists of the Year Awards and Celebration, which take place on April, I had it here, April 19th. So just about a month from now. That's a Friday night, and it's a great event. We hope that you can all make it. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you to Peter. Can we show some appreciation to Peter Sinclair for his fantastic information? Really appreciate it, Peter.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, Bill, for all your work.